Welcome to Biology 1441. This is Professor Carefit coming to you from the Biology Bunker. I hope everyone's healthy and safe. And I want to point out to you that this lecture is being filmed in spring of 2020. And if you are watching this in spring of 2020, the PowerPoints are also available to you via Top Hat, including any embedded videos in those lectures. So let's move on. What we're doing now is we are moving into the endocrine system and a little bit about the nervous system. So these are systems often referred to as integrating systems because they integrate all those complicated organ systems together, making you a functional, multicellular, multi-organ organism. There are some learning goals associated with this chapter. Please have a look at this slide carefully. Now, the endocrine system as well as the nervous system are known as integrating systems. As I said, they coordinate all of the functions of the organ systems together, allowing you to maintain homeostasis. The environment changes, right? The environment has variation from day to day, but your organ systems can be coordinated. Essentially, they talk to one another, allowing you to maintain homeostasis and be a functional multicellular being. So what I want you to do is on Top Hat, or if you have mastering, you can watch this video there. But watch this video and answer these questions. This is something I'd like you to know, but you can pick up on your own from your book and from the video. Where is insulin produced? What organ? And then in which cells of that organ? What does insulin do? Where does glucose go after insulin is released? What do alpha cells produce, and what effect does it have on the, or do they have on the body? Explain how the above system fails to function in a type 1 and in individuals with type 2 diabetes. So see if you can work that out and answer those questions. The video looks like this on the PowerPoint. You can go into it and right-click and then hit play if you're looking at the PowerPoint. So there are three types of signaling shown on this figure. I just want to mention what they are and how they differ. A is endocrine signaling. In endocrine signaling, there are cells, often in glands, right, that secrete via exocytosis some kind of chemical signal. So think back to Bio 2, think of exocytosis. We have vesicles or transport, some sort of transport vesicle or a vacuole of some kind full of chemicals that undergoes exocytosis. Those go into the interstitial fluid and are then taken up by the blood vessels. They are sent throughout the body where they can then diffuse out of the blood vessels and dock to surface proteins on different cells throughout the body, leading to some kind of response. So what the endocrine system does here is it sends out chemical signals that can influence the whole body and have a somewhat long-lasting effect. Whereas a nervous system signal, might fire and make you move your finger or whatever. A endocrine signal might cause your heart rate to go up in fear, and it will stay up for a while. It has a longer effect. Another type of signaling involved in the endocrine system is paracrine signaling. Now notice paracrine signaling, also a very similar thing. We have a cell excreting via exocytosis some kind of chemical into the environment, but in this case it's affecting the cells only in its immediate vicinity, leading to a response. Whereas earlier in the endocrine system, those chemical signals were transported by the blood throughout the body. And then lastly, autocrine. Auto means same or self. That's when a cell excretes chemicals and then picks up its own signals and causes a response. That's autocrine signaling. Meanwhile, nervous systems will fire an electrical signal down the neuron, but when we get to the end of that neuron, what we have is synaptic signaling. A synapse is the gap between the neuron and the next cell. Either that cell's another neuron or perhaps it's another cell. And what happens is chemicals are released by the neuron which are then going to cross that synapse and then bind to receptors, causing a response in the next cell. So these are known as neurotransmitters, these chemicals. They come out of the synapse and dock with the next cell in line, whether it be another neuron or another cell, and that leads to a response. Meanwhile, neuroendocrine signaling is real similar, where a signal is sent down a neuron, but then the chemical signals from the synapse here actually go into the blood, and then they are transmitted just like a hormone would be transmitted, sent by the endocrine system and endocrine signaling, and those chemical signals diffuse out of the blood and dock to cells all throughout the body. So what we've seen here are several types of signaling. All are really somewhat similar. It just depends on how far away and the signal is picked up and how the signal is sent. If you go back to an earlier chapter, you'll see that there are some very basic pathways of chemical signaling. Signals, for example, like this is we can call this a hormone of some kind. It's some kind of chemical signal. It will dock to a receptor. Now, that receptor might be in the cell membrane, like this protein here, or it might be inside the cell. But here we have a signal molecule. Perhaps it was sent by the endocrine system. It docks to a receptor. That's called reception. Okay? Then that leads to the second part of the sending of a signal, and that's known as transduction. Transduction is often a chain reaction within the cell where one molecule activates another, which activates another, sometimes activating many others, amplifying the signal. And then finally, by the end of all of that, we have the activation of the cellular response. And that response could be a number of things, like dividing by mitosis, or it could be self-destruction of the cell, or it could tell the cell to manufacture a certain protein. So reception, the signal is received. Transduction, the signal is transmitted between relay molecules. And then response, the cell responds, depending on what signal was sent. That's the basic steps of cell communication. Now, hormones, those chemical signals that are sent by those different pathways that we saw earlier, they can come in a number of categories. They can be hormones, which are polypeptides, steroids, and amines. Okay, polypeptides and most amines are water soluble, meaning they dissolve in water and would be received by a receptor on the outside of a cell like this. So that receptor is dissolved in the interstitial fluid right here, right? It's dissolved and it will dock and be received. However, steroid hormones are usually large I should say not large, but they're usually nonpolar. Therefore, they don't dissolve in water very well, and they are lipid soluble. So if a steroid hormone is picked up by a cell, it will often dissolve into the cell membrane and cross inside the cell. So the receptor for a steroid hormone will often be inside the cytoplasm of the receptor cell. So here we can see a cell in this case we have endocrine signaling here, where we have a water-soluble hormone secreted into the interstitial fluid. It's picked up by the blood vessel, sent throughout the body. It's picked up by a receptor protein, and then that's going to cause a response. And maybe that's something in the cytoplasm, or maybe that turns on or off a particular gene. That might be the response. Whereas over here, if we have a lipid-soluble hormone, it might go into the blood. Now, there are proteins here that it's docked to help it intermix with water. That's what those little transport proteins are showing you. It makes it so it can dissolve in water for a while. But then it goes into the target cell, so we've lost that transport protein, and it docks, in this case, to a receptor. In this case, that receptor is in the nucleus. It could be a receptor out here in the cytoplasm, leading to something like a gene turning on, producing a particular protein or something. So the two different kinds of hormones can be received in different ways. And there are different kinds of cell receptors. If you take any physiology courses, you're going to learn a lot about these different kinds of receptors. But I just want to show you what I want to focus on in this diagram is not the kind of receptor, but the transduction pathway. So we have a G protein coupled receptor, receives a hormone. In this case, it's epinephrine, so adrenaline, right? And that leads to this molecule being turned on by GTP, which is kind of like ATP. And then it sticks to this molecule, which causes ATP to turn on a second messenger, a different molecule, which then turns on this protein, which then leads to a number of things happening. In this case, inhibition of glycogen synthesis and promotion of glycogen breakdown. So what's happening here? Adrenaline has been received by a cell. It causes a chain reaction of molecules, each one changing another, usually by sticking a phosphate group onto something, changing a protein structure. And the very last one, excuse me, the very last one here is protein kinase A. And the kinase is basically a fancy word for a protein that phosphorylates other proteins. So it sticks phosphate groups from ATP onto other proteins, turning them on. And what happens at the end of this? Adrenaline stuck here, glycogen stops being formed, and instead we break glycogen down, releasing glucose into the blood so your cells have lots of extra energy to do what they need to do. So lots of interesting things going on there. Another example, we have a hormone estradiol coming into a cell, sticking to a receptor. That receptor then turns on gene regulation, and we end up producing a new protein. So it activates transcription translation, producing eventually a new protein here. These are ribosomes, and this is the messenger RNA here. And we're making a new protein, but that would never have happened if it had not received this signal. So we have reception. We show this in glowing because it's turned on. So that's transduction, and response is production of protein. And we have a lot of glands that are involved in this system throughout the body. Our sex glands, like our ovaries, our gonads, ovaries or testes. We have adrenal glands that sit on top of our kidneys. So renal means kidney and ad means above, so adrenal. The pancreas secretes lots of hormones. We have hormones in the pituitary gland here up by the brain, all kinds of very, very important glands throughout the body. But if you remember that in essence they are secreted and they cause an effect. And that effect is caused by the reception by receptors, followed by transduction, followed by a response. So here's a very simple but pathway that you might be familiar with. A stimulus is received by the endocrine cell. It releases a hormone, and this actually tells you where this is taking place. So what's the stimulus? Low pH in the duodenum. That causes S cells in the duodenum to secrete a hormone, which is called secretin. That's what it's called. It circulates throughout the body, but it's picked up by one of the places where it finds a target cell, a place to dock, is in the pancreas. And when these pancreas cells dock to this chemical, they release bicarbonate. Remember, bicarbonate neutralizes acid. And once we neutralize the stimulus, then we'll stop production. This is an example of negative feedback in action. Okay, so what have we talked about in this short lecture video? Well, we talked about the major categories of endocrine signaling, as well as a little bit of nervous system signaling, which we'll talk about more later. We talked about some of the classes of what signals are made of, the basic steps of communication, and then I showed you several examples of communication, ending with this example, which is related to the digestive system. So we will have another lecture on the endocrine system that I will post shortly. Thanks for watching.